Saturday, 11 a.m. Got stuck with Mr. Price from across the road. I usually avoid him, or try to, but for a man in his 70s, Mr. Price is sprightly, especially when he knows someone's in front of his house. He loves a chat, Mr. Price. I suppose he's about 6 foot in the old scale. In fact, Mr. Price only speaks old scale, pounds, miles, yards, and right you are. Apparently, he's an ex-pro sprinter. Only Coral tells an amusing story about when Mr. Price put lead in his running spikes at the Storwell Gift. He earned a favourable handicap for the final, and then, when no one was watching, he removed the lead and ran faster without any change to his gait. No doubt this pedigree for sprinting helps him to be a successful gossip. Whenever he sees a group of people, he still has the speed off the mark, plus the determination of an elite athlete to get them before they move away. Mr. Price owns the only weatherboard house left on Pleasant Avenue. The eastern side of Pleasant Avenue, Mr. Price's side, reflects the 1950s, while our side of the street, where everything's red or blonde brick, is strictly 1970s. Some houses on Mr. Price's side are still weatherboard underneath, but they've been hardy planked or cement rendered to look competitive in today's marketplace. Mr. Price's house has one feature that no other house in the street has, an imaginary spider's web stretching the entire length of his property. Whenever you pass by his house, you need to be on full alert or risk getting caught in his web. Vibrations from a struggling neighbour alert Mr. Price inside the house, and within seconds, this speedy old pensioner is wrapping you in his lethal combination of conversation and guilt. Normally, I wouldn't place myself in a position where I could be trapped in his web, but circumstances last night forced me to park my Gemini SL in front of his house. We had guests who parked in our driveway. Coincidentally, the Gumleys had a function at their place, and their guests park where I park when I can't park in our driveway, so I parked across the road in front of Mr. Price's. Intruders to Pleasant Avenue always create a domino effect. They upset the familiar, and as we know, unfamiliarity creates new situations to deal with. Mr. Price works hard to maintain his position as keeper of the vine. The Venetians in his front window are permanently bent from years of monitoring the neighbours. Not all his methods for obtaining gossip are so obvious. For instance, every night, no matter what the weather is, he goes fishing for blackfish. Next morning, if he sees anyone he knows, he gives them his spare blackfish, which they then put in their freezer along with the blackfish he gave them the morning before that. At first you think, what a nice old stick Mr. Price is to give away all those fish, until you're going somewhere in your car. As you're leaving, he stands where he knows he'll be seen and pulls the longest face in the world. You think, look, there's that old Mr. Price. Let's ask him to come along. He gives us all those lovely blackfish. Want to come to the Lion Park, Mr. Price? You ask. Within seconds, he's in your car, fiddling with the radio, complaining about the windows being up or down. 10 kilometres later, he's got some gossip out of you, which he then files away to use at a later date. These blackfish are emotional currency. Mr. Price is a very rich man, but only in Pleasant Avenue. This particular morning, I'm unable to avoid his dreaded web. As I fiddle with the lock on my Gemini SL, I get hopelessly trapped in it. Mr. Price wraps me in pleasant conversation with an appraisal of the local weather, followed by an update on his daughter's family. Oh yes, little Cordelia, my youngest granddaughter, was playing with these older children on the weekend, and she was dodging them, just like a teenager. However, On this autumn day, a day when the winds are offshore, the sky's blue, and the tides are king, something other than surf, sex and food is on my mind. This unresolved bumper bar mystery is pacing up and down my thoughts. When the dull throb of Mr. Price's pleasant conversation falters, instead of using the gap to escape, like most people do, like I normally do, I ask him if he heard the noise last night, hoping he won't be able to explain it, and I'll tell him something he doesn't know. To my dismay, before I form a thought, before I create a sound, Mr. Price produces the following explanation. It was Mrs. Gumley. She drove her car straight through the front gates. She went up to the businessman's club and forgot to open the gates when she got back. Drove right through, right you are. He often finishes his sentences with right you are, so there's no gap for the listener to take control of the conversation away from him. You saw the he says. Second time this year, right you are, he says, thrusting a wrapped piece of newspaper into my hands. I don't need to look at it to know what it is. Blackfish. Bloody blackfish.